Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Sunday night. Had to wait till tonight because Jackson was at SantaCon all day in New York City.
Huh.
It's a true statement. Isn't that true?
Part of it's true.
All right. Our boys are joining us from Las Vegas, where they're covering the NBA Cup. We've got Tim Bontemps. What's going on, Mr. Bontemps?
Hello, everybody.
And the one, the only, Ban MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. My adult supervision left just a couple hours ago. 3 more nights in Vegas, but I'm going to tell you, the IT department, about she was babysitting, bad influence. I had to calm her down.
Oh, well, yeah. I've seen her operate in Vegas before. She's happy to partake.
She was having a good time.
Partake of the offerings. All right. Well, having a good time on Saturday night were the Thunder and the Bucks, who came out with victories. MacMahon, I'm going to start with the game you focused on, the Thunder game. That game was sort of a classic old school playoff style feel game. I think it was
half.
Yeah, I think it was like 43-40 at the half or something like that.
It was 42-41, and I think the most shocking stat, courtesy of Stats Williams and his crew, was that both teams had the worst shooting half of the season in the first half. You know, you knew, like, hey, top 2 defenses in the league, like this thing has big time rock fight potential. That's absolutely what we got in the first half. How low the shooting percentage is, you know, I didn't necessarily expect that, but you expected that style of game. To me, the surprising thing about that game was just how easy Oklahoma City made it look in the second half when they put up 70 points on a damn good Houston defense.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. Houston and Dallas, the 2 teams they've beat this week to reach or I guess last week, to reach the Cup final. Like, those 2 teams not only are very strong teams, potential playoff opponents, but are playing well right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Dallas is one of the hottest teams in the league. Houston's really got it coming together. I'm not sure exactly where they are. I think they're in the top 4 of the standings.
Yep.
Like, this is, you know, I'm not that we're going to get too excited about Cup result in terms of long term. Obviously, the Lakers won it last year and then immediately went to the tank for the next month. But don't you think that the Thunder have kind of acquitted themselves pretty well? Obviously, they're the number 1 seed in the West, but like just showing what they can do defensively.
Well, listen, those 2 games, their defense was great in those 2 games. Obviously, they shut down Luka. We talked about that on the pod on Wednesday. And then they shut down the Rockets, who are a team that struggles at times offensively anyway, on Saturday. But look, the story of these 2 games is not about their defense. It's about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He was unbelievable on Wednesday, had the incredible game against Dallas, totally outplayed Luka Doncic. First half of this game, he went 3 for 12. He had 13 points. He ends up with 32, 8, 6, and 5 steals, was smooth as silk in the second half, as always, got to his spots, completely took apart the Rockets defense. Dylan Brooks, his Canadian pal, was guarding him. He absolutely dusted him. One of the best crossovers you'll see of the entire season in the fourth quarter. And like, he's now going up against Giannis Antetokounmpo on Tuesday. And to me, last year we saw Tyrese Haliburton have a coming out party in the in-season tournament or in the NBA Cup. Obviously, Shai is on another level up already from Tyrese Haliburton. But especially if they win on Tuesday, which I expect them to do, to take this thing, I mean, this is about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's true coming out party as a top 5 player and a star in the league, and a guy that is going to be, you know, we've talked about who's going to be the face of the league going forward. This Thunder team isn't going anywhere. They've got one of the best defenses in the league. They've got the super young team. They're going to be great. And Shai is just powering them along and taking apart everybody that's coming out.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to call it a coming out party for a guy who was the runner-up MVP last
I was going to let it go.
Well, but I'm just saying, from in terms of, like, he's been a guy we have been talking about a lot, but I think the general public is still learning who this guy is. We've talked about it this week, Tim. They're not playing on Christmas. They haven't had a ton of national TV games for this team yet. And games like this are showing people what we have been seeing as people who watch the NBA regularly for a long time, that this guy is as good as anybody in the league.
Well, Oklahoma City is absolutely forcing its way into the casual fan consciousness. And look, the league screwed up. The Thunder, as the team that was the number 1 seed in the West last year, with that much young talent, absolutely should have been on Christmas. And hey, I've said this before, but the NBA needs to figure out how to market Oklahoma City. Don't cry about waiting to the
100%.
West Finals, potentially the finals, because this is a team that over the next 5 years is going to win a lot of playoff series. They're going to be playing deep into May, likely into June on some occasions. So you better figure out how to make this a marketable franchise. And Shea, it's really interesting. He is so damn good and so well-rounded. He does not have a short attention span type of game. And what I mean by that is he's not like an IG highlight machine. He's not John Morant, flying through the lane and dunking on 7-footers. He's not Luka Doncic hitting. He's added a little bit of step back, but not that sort of step back threat. He's not throwing the 70-foot lobs or the bullet passes from one side of the floor to the opposite corner, the no looks, all those kind of things. It's footwork, it's efficiency, it's smooth. But man, he's ridiculously good. And like right now, where the Nuggets are in the standing, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander absolutely should be the MVP favorite.
Maybe we'll find out where he sits in that race this week.
Yeah,
Are you waiting? Are you waiting until after the Cup final to distribute the ballots, Bontemps?
That's to be determined.
Because that might be tight, right?
Yeah,
it could be a little tight.
So and I hope that the voters in the Bontemps poll that are coming up this week, I hope that they are not overly. They don't need more to be seen from Shai. I will say something else that just has impressed me about him the last few years, but was again on display in this game. His demeanor doesn't change at all in the clutch.
Yeah.
He doesn't.
He's never rattled.
Yeah,
ever.
even guys who are great in the clutch, you see their demeanor change. Like, Giannis, he's a tremendous player in the clutch. He tends to literally just put his head down, put blinders on, and play. Yeah. But Shai plays the same way, just almost just a little bit more aggressively. I mean, that's what's almost so scary about him.
And he's talked about kind of figuring out when to crank up that aggressiveness, when to try to quote unquote take over a game, and when to just trust his teammates and make the so-called right play. And that's a balance that he's talked about trying to find, and kind of one of the hard things about or one of the challenges of being a superstar in this league. But man, he absolutely trusts the guys around him, and he should, because this roster is loaded.
Speaking of that, you wrote in, I was reading in your story off the game that the 21 points that Isaiah Hartenstein scored was a career high.
Yeah, that actually surprised me. And I double checked it. It's true. 9 of 12, 5 of those were dunks. All the dunks were feeds. And Hartenstein's just been such a great fit. He obviously hadn't played a second yet with Chet. By the way, in games that Oklahoma City had a starting center available for the entire game, they are now, I believe, 17-2. They've only lost twice. 3 of their losses, one was when Chet got hurt early against the Warriors, and 2 were in that period where Chet was out and Hartenstein hadn't quite recovered from the broken hand yet. When they've got a big man, they've only lost twice this season. But Hartenstein is such a phenomenal fit, because not only can he finish, he's got that floater. He's a great passer out of the short roll. And I was talking to him last night, and he said, like you were saying, Shai's demeanor never changes. Like, Shai's 1 of 9. Nobody's worried about Shai. Nobody's worried about whether he's going to find a groove. Nobody's worried about whether he's going to start forcing things. And he talks about, there's a lot of times where guys, stars, if you throw a second defender at him, if you blitz him in a pick and roll, they might hold it an extra second trying to make something happen. He says, boom, Shai gets it out of his hands, and the blender starts. Lou Dort becoming a 40+% 3-point shooter over these last couple of years is absolutely terrifying. He might be the best, quote unquote 3-and-D guy, just like pure 3-and-D guy.
Teams are still leaving him too, because they have to make choices.
He was 4
you got to make a choice
in the second half yesterday. And again, Shai had 5 steals yesterday. Shai is absolutely part of the number 1 defense in the league. Ask Shai Gilgeous-Alexander who should be defensive player of the year, and he'll tell you Lou Dort. Now, I'm not saying necessarily Lou should be defensive player of the year, but what I am saying is the fact that guy has not made an all-defensive team is asinine. It's absolutely asinine.
Well, and you go down their roster too to get to the defense after talking about Shea before, and by removing Josh Giddey from the mix, and in particular replacing him with Alex Caruso, you roll every guy out there. Isaiah Joe's the worst defender they have. He holds up fine in the limited role that he's got, but whether it's Cason Wallace or Caruso or Dort, Hartenstein, Shea Alexander, Jalen Williams, all these guys are excellent defensive players, and there's just nowhere for the opposition to go. Like, you look at this Houston team, they're already struggled on a normal day offensively. And when they didn't have Fred hitting deep threes and Şengün couldn't get anything to fall in the paint, they just didn't have anything to go to against these guys because there's no weak link to attack. There's nowhere to try to go. You can't, even if you try to swing the ball around, the Thunder don't really have to double anybody because they can go straight up with whoever they want. And when they fly around and start creating turnovers because they can really create a lot of pressure in the half court, then they get out in transition and they're flying down the court in 3 seconds. I mean, it's an incredibly impressive team to watch play.
Well, and forget the Rockets. Look at what they did against Luka, Kyrie, and the Mavericks. Again, a team that has been cooking, a team that, as we're recording this, just finished scoring 81 points in the first half against the Warriors. Luka had 28 points and 9 assists in a half. Do you know how relieved he is that he doesn't have to have Lou Dort hanging all over him, and the Thunder were throwing doubles? And now it's like in this game against the Warriors, every time the Warriors send a second body at Luka, it's a dunk or an open three. But the Thunder, they send a second body. They are so good with their rotations. And like you said, there are no weak links. So it's good players rotating on the back end of that stuff. What they did against the Mavericks defensively was, unbelievably impressive. Now, Thunder killer PJ Washington, questionable all day, despite not making the trip to Oklahoma City due to an illness. That was interesting, by the way. So he didn't play in that game, and they did a great job on Luka and Kyrie in that playoff series. Those guys averaged a combined 40.2 points per game in that playoff series, but guys like PJ Washington just killed the Thunder. He didn't play in that game, but still, the Thunder are, the gap between them and the Rockets, as good as the Rockets are defensively, it's well over a point. It's a pretty comfortable gap.
The Thunder had the best record, tied for the best record in the West last year, and they replaced Josh Giddey with Alex Caruso, and they added Isaiah Hartenstein to their team. I know Chet Holmgren's hurt right now, but they are dramatically better, and they already were a team that was pushing 60 wins with a bunch of super young guys playing. Like, they're awesome.
Jalen Williams had an excellent game in this one too, scored over 20. He seems to play very well in big games. I know he faltered at the end of that Mavericks series last year. Mm-hmm. There's his teammates are trying to start up a campaign to get him on the All-Star team.
He's got the numbers. They've got the record.
He's not going to make the All-Star team.
Look, he's got a hell of a case. That's all I'm going to say. He's got the numbers.
He's deserving. He's deserving of making it. But when you go through, I went through this with a couple people the other night. You go through the list of players in the All-Star game in the Western Conference, you get to 12 really fast. Yeah, it's really hard. That's not a knock on him. He's having a great year, but it's, you start saying, are you not going to have Kevin Durant in the game? Or you're not going to have LeBron James in the game? You're not going to have Steph Curry in the game? The math gets very difficult.
I'm just saying he is a bona fide co-star for the Thunder. And so is Chet. Chet's obviously hurt right now. But you look at Jalen Williams' numbers, rookie of the year runner-up, got much better his second year last year, got much better this year. And, they were asking Shea and some other people, like, what's the ceiling on this guy? You don't want to put a ceiling on him. Who knows? He's a 6'5" guy who's athletic, who's skilled, and can do pretty much everything on the court, including occasionally, if he has to, defend the other team's center.
That's true. It's happened this year. Okay, so the Thunder are 12-3 in their last 15 games. That's the best record in that stretch in the league, tied with the Milwaukee Bucks, who started the season 2-8, very famously. And we started pointing out that their draft pick was not protected. They don't have it. So they've gone 12-3 on their last 15. It's a little bit better than that overall. I think they're 14-11. So
yeah, they're 14-11, 12-3 since the rough start.
Yeah. So in that stretch, I took a look at their numbers. Bontemps, you talked about this before they started the stretch. You thought that they were primed for a bit of a turnaround because their schedule was friendly. Their numbers aren't awesome in that stretch. The win-loss is awesome. The numbers aren't awesome. They're 10th in offense, 10th in defense. That's obviously very good. You're top 10 in both. You're a contender. So they're not playing great, but Lillard and they're playing well. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but they're not totally dominant numbers wise. Lillard and Giannis are just scoring huge heaps of points. Huge heaps of points. I don't even remember what the total they had on Saturday night. Atlanta kept the game close throughout the game. It was the lesser game on the docket, and I understand. Obviously, Atlanta has been playing well. By the way, of those 3 losses, one of the losses came to the Hawks in Milwaukee about 10, 15 days ago, whatever it was. But still, Bontemps, Giannis is going to be, I would assume, on a lot of top 3s on the straw poll ballot coming up as well. And he was there again.
Yeah, he's been great. I mean, Dame has honestly been pretty up and down. I didn't think he was that great in that game on Saturday. He was fine. I mean, he had 25 on 8 for 21.
Yeah, he really got off to a slow start and got better as the game went on.
He did enough to get them over the line in the end. I mean, it was him and Giannis. But really, this whole stretch has just been about Giannis. He has put this team on his back and carried them along. And you look at this game on Saturday, it was another example of him, like you said earlier, just putting his head down, going to the rim relentlessly. Nobody could really stay in front of him. The Hawks had Jalen Johnson on him. They tried different looks on him. They did a decent job guarding him, but he's going to draw a ton of foul shots. He shot 18 in the game. He went 12 for 18 from the line. He's averaging over 11 a game per game from the line, second in the league. And I think Zion is first, who's only obviously played a handful of games. So he's consistently getting there 10, 11, 12 times a night. And, look, the Bucks have done what they needed to do to right the ship. I think you saw both in this game when Trey had 35 and 10, and for a lot of the game was, getting to decent spots and orchestrating the offense. And certainly what we saw in the game against Jalen Suggs the other night, like we talked about, when he went 3 for 11 from 3 and still had a career high 32 points. They really struggle with athleticism and they struggle with perimeter defense. I am very curious to see how they try to slow down the combination of both Shea and Jalen Williams in this game. They don't really have a great option for one of them, let alone both of them. So that is going to be a challenge for them to try to stop. But look, they have reestablished a foundation of their season. They've given themselves something to build on. They're trying to get Chris Middleton back up to speed. He again was not very good in this game. They're going to need more from him down the road. But this is a credit to Giannis for putting these guys on his back and turning them around. And every night he seems to be putting up 35 and 15. And it's been really impressive for him to really just drag these guys along and give them a chance to salvage their season. And now they're back in the top 6. And, they position themselves to make a run at home court advantage in the East. And they've got time to try to get things sorted out.
Yeah, but I tell you, Giannis against that OKC defense is going to be fascinating to watch. And the Thunder, obviously, are just clear-cut the best defensive team in the league. Their stoppers aren't size appropriate for a Giannis matchup. Their stoppers are Lou Dort, who
he's strength appropriate though.
Yeah,
maybe.
he is, and I think he will get the assignment. I think Cason Wallace, who people got to start looking at Cason Wallace as one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. By the way,
he is awfully good.
He's
where does he rank on the team? You like to always talk about.
It's funny. I asked Caruso, Lou Dort, and then Cason Wallace when I was talking to Caruso was sitting next, and Caruso said, while looking at Wallace, he's a close third. So, and they all agree Lou Dort's the guy. Like Lou's the best of especially on ball. Lou will tell you Caruso is so good in the gaps. But man,
Caruso might be the best in the league in the gaps.
Yeah, Caruso is such a ball hunter. I mean,
exactly.
He just gets his hands on everything.
Yeah, and boy, Wallace has that in him too. Wallace's hands are unbelievably strong for a guy his size. But again, I forgot who step back he swatted against the Rockets. But again, I'm talking about not like sneaking from behind.
I think it was Jalen Green's.
Okay.
I think
he swatted a Luka step back. I'm not sure I've seen somebody just from the front get to a Luka step back like he did. And then Luka got the ball back, and you could tell he didn't like that, and he went at him, and he didn't, he threw up a tough shot that didn't come close to going in. This guy, the Thunder have three of probably the top, at least 10 best on-ball defenders, and that's not even including Jalen Williams, who's also really, really good. But look, obviously stopping Giannis, whether it's Dort or J-Dub, whoever gets the primary assignment, that's going to be a whole team deal. That's going to be a pack the paint type of deal. Hartenstein's going to need to have a big time rim protection game, which he's been phenomenal in that role. But man, Giannis is just a monster. And again, the biggest play of the game was not Giannis putting his head down and getting to the basket. It's him peeling off and somehow swatting Capella at the rim on a lob, very much like that swat against the Suns in the finals. It's one of the all-time great playoff blocks. Giannis does things that just you don't see very many people in the history of the game being able to do.
Well, and that's why if you're a Bucks fan, you still have belief in this team being able to do stuff, right? Because he's a special player who can do special things. And like, obviously the supporting cast is struggling at times, and we'll see where it lands. And by the way, Dyson Daniels was basically matched up second for second with Dame in that game, which is part of why Dame was looking fairly pedestrian. It's not going to be any easier, as you mentioned, going up against this fleet of guys on the Thunder. Whoever's on him, it's going to be a hard moment for him every second he's on the court. But yeah, like Giannis playing like this gives you reason to believe if you're a Bucks fan. And he's going to be, like you said, I'm sure he's going to be up near the top of the MVP race. And, it's going to be enough to have them in the fight in the East, especially if they go up against anybody but Boston. Like, you go into a series and it's Giannis against the Knicks, or Giannis against the Cavs, or Giannis against Philly, or, the Orlando or Miami, whoever they have to play. It's going to be hard to pick anybody but him as the best player on the court. You got the best player on the court in a series, you're going to feel like you got a pretty good chance to win.
And that's what really is fascinating about this matchup tomorrow is I'm not sure he's the best player on the court. That's how good Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is.
Yes, that is true.
So one guy that I would say has actually kind of made a small but important impact for the Bucks in this turnaround is AJ Green, who was he their first round pick 2 years ago, Bontemps?
No,
second
he
round
was
pick?
a late second round pick.
Oh, wait,
I was going to say I wasn't sure he was drafted.
Believe he was a late second round pick.
I know it's all. First off, he's shooting 47 or 48% on three. He's one of these guys who's like 95% of his shots are from three.
You know what AJ stands for, right?
I do not.
Awesome jumper.
Is that your line or is that somebody else's line? Or
he was undrafted out of Northern Iowa.
Undrafted.
Yeah.
He's another one of these. By the way, he's another one of these Iowa shooters cut from the same cloth.
He was a guy that
Kyle Korver.
Yes. Well, he was a guy that came on the radar for me, admittedly, when as a senior in college, Northern Iowa played a game at Bonaventure, and he scored like 37 points and hit 10 threes, I think, to win the game in overtime. I was like, holy crap, who is this kid? And then didn't really think about him again. Then saw him pop up on the Bucks. Didn't really play his first year. And like you said, he's developed into one of the best shooters in the league. And when he is open, every time he shoots, you expect him to make it.
So I realize it's extremely small sample size, what I'm about to say. I'm not going to overreact to this, but in clutch situations, because I've noticed him hit a couple of clutch threes. Yeah. He's 5 out of 7 in clutch situations this year. Last 5 minutes within 5. I saw a couple of them live. But I think the point is that he's developing a situation where Doc Rivers is willing to play him down the stretch in close games.
Well, and you have to have shooting around Giannis, because clutch situations, what are you saying? You cannot let Giannis just put his head down and beat us. We got to pack the paint. We got to make somebody else beat us. You got to put shooting around them.
And they look for him. There's a trust developing there. I mean, they so badly needed someone to step forward and play a supporting role. It looked like they might have had, when they got Gary Trent for the minimum, it was like, wow, that could be a real addition. But Gary Trent has just not gotten it done.
Yeah.
By the way, he's been the opposite in clutch situations. The numbers are poor. So
and maybe that also factors into Doc's willingness to play awesome jumper green.
it might be, but he's been a bit of a welcome revelation for the Bucks. They're going to go as far as Giannis and Dame take them clearly, but AJ Green really had one of the more interesting stories in the Eastern Conference coming out this year. Okay, that championship game is on Tuesday night. We've got a little something special cooked up for the podcast we're going to record that night. A special guest is lined up to join Bontemps and MacMahon that night. I'm gonna be in LA. We're gonna have our little studio here, and so if you're online, you'll know who. If you're an online person, an online NBA fan, you'll know who this guy is. But that's all I'm gonna say. All right, so that's the NBA Cup. Had some transactions. Transaction season is beginning. It was an interesting one, actually, just very minor. I'll just take a second on it. The Pistons cut Paul Reed and fell below the salary floor. And the reason they ended up signing another guy off their G League team today, but I hadn't realized that their payroll was that low, that they cut Paul Reed and fell under the salary floor. Boy, watch the Pistons as a third team in
well, and that's why their salary's been so low. I mean, they purposely came into the season with a bunch of salary cap space to play around with. They're currently about 15 million below the number, 14, 15, somewhere in that ballpark. And for all we've talked about with the difficulties teams are going to have making deals and the ability, you're almost going to have every team trade be a 3-team trade, despite your insistence over time fairly that 3-team trades are 0-team trades. But the new reality of the NBA is to get a deal done with this first apron trigger, you almost have to have a third team in most of these deals, like we saw in the Cat trade back in September. And Detroit is going to be sitting there saying, hey, we will take on some stuff for assets over the next few weeks. So that they are going to be a team certainly to monitor because of that. And like you said, cutting Paul Reed, he's not somebody people think a ton about, but that shaved several $1 million off of what they were going to have used up in cap space, gives them even more room to play with.
Yeah, as soon as that happened, I had an executive in the league reach out to me and be like, hey, do they have a trade lined up? Because they were like, wait a minute, they just shaved a bunch of money off. Like, what are they doing? And I checked on it, and the answer was not yet, but stay tuned. So,
but the Bank of Trajan is open for business.
Yeah, so just that was a little piece of business, but just FYI. Then we saw our first trade, significant trade of the season, with the Brooklyn Nets trading Dennis Schröder to the Golden State Warriors for D'Anthony Melton. Now Melton is out for the year with a torn ACL. He was, they had high hopes for him, kind of a bummer for them. And so they go get Schröder. And the Nets did this deal. Yes, they traded out 3 seconds and got one back, although I think the third, it was a protection thing. I think they're all three unprotected.
Whatever. It's for seconds, and it's to get worse.
It's exactly right.
Schröder was helping them win too many damn games.
Exactly correct.
They couldn't wait to try to maximize the value. Hey, they can't be a 500 team or anywhere near come trade deadline. They got to start getting worse.
They literally agreed to it 24 hours before they were allowed to. They were so anxious to get him on the next flight.
Like, good luck. Stop making baskets for us.
Well, and by the way, now with no Cam Thomas, who's out with a hamstring injury, and no Dennis Schröder, all of a sudden, I mean, you've got, Ben Simmons when he's able to play, and then not really anybody else to play the point. I mean, they're going to be trying to play Shake Milton there. They're going to play, maybe Keon Johnson there. I mean, the point of this very clearly, the best way to make a team worse, if you're trying to do that, is to have subpar point guard play. And the Nets are going to be struggling to generate any offense now. And, you say that about, like you guys say that correctly about where they are in the standings. That being said, for as good as the Nets have been and as great of a job as Jordi Fernandez has done, and he's done a really great job, I believe right now they are 8th in the lottery standings.
Unacceptable.
And they're 3 or 4, and they're 3 losses out of 5th and 4 out of 3rd.
Yeah, and
So
they need to sink, and everybody understands that. Like
right. My point is just that even though they've had a great start, they're not very far away from being right on track to where they want to be, which is why doing this trade now
yes,
makes a lot of sense.
it's very doable. They have their picks. They gave up all that Suns equity or draft capital to get the control of their picks back in this coming draft and the next draft. They need good picks in these two
A
drafts.
couple weeks ago, Bontemps. It's exactly right. A couple weeks ago, Bontemps and I in our Friday story. I don't know what we call it. We don't have a name for it yet, but
Yes, you do. The Romo Witten notebook.
The what?
Romo.
No, just let him make his joke
notebook.
and move on. Just make him make his
Just some
joke.
sort of
Drawing up plays
Cowboys.
behind my back notebook. Go.
Okay. Not everybody knows Cowboys history. I don't.
Get your popcorn ready. You know it.
Yeah,
All
he's calling himself the Terrell Owens in the situation, which is the only accurate part of it.
I don't remember a lot of this. So anyway, but Bontemps and I were talking about how there was 4 teams that were out of whack and look at their draft position. 2 teams were performing way under what everybody thought, which was Philly and New Orleans, and 2 teams that were overperforming, who were basically tanking, which were Brooklyn and Chicago. Chicago is taking some losses, still probably winning more than they should.
Mhm.
And Brooklyn was just way overperforming. That was when they went to the West Coast and went like 3-1 on a West Coast trip, including winning in Brooklyn. I'm sorry, winning in Golden State. And when Steve Kerr talked about this trade on Sunday, he said, Dennis Schröder has been kicking my ass across 3 continents. Because he was talking about when he played for the German national team. He was MVP of the
World Cup.
The World Cup in 23 in the Philippines, where he was awesome. The Germans in that particular game just crushed the Americans on the boards, but Schroder was great, and from 3. And then last year they played in London in a exhibition game, which the Americans won, but it was Schroder again played well. And of course, I think I think Kerr said he's played really well against them the last 2 or 3 times he's played the Warriors. So, and he actually said that, and he stopped short of guaranteeing that Schroder was going to move into the starting lineup next to Steph, but he pretty much said that is the plan.
Pretty much said he's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Bontemps doesn't really take the Warriors out of anything else that they would do. The second round picks were not going to be a part of a potential major player transaction. This is to help them get better this week, but I don't think it necessarily changes what their potential star chasing is.
Well, yeah, this is a very simple transaction. The Warriors coming into tonight's game have an offensive rating of 119.1 when Stephen Curry is on the court. I believe that would rank 5th in the league. I have it right here. The Warriors, that rating over the course of the season would be 4th in the NBA. Their offensive rating when Stephen Curry is off the court, that would be 101.7. That would rank 2 points below the Washington Wizards. This is because this trade was made right now because the Warriors have been terrible whenever Stephen Curry is off the court, because the Warriors have nobody else who can create their own shot. And honestly, it is a reflection on the play of Brandon Podziemski, who has not played to the level the Warriors hoped he would this year. He's really struggled as the primary backup point guard, the guy who they were hoping could run the offense when Steph wasn't out there.
The guy who was untouchable 3-4 months ago. He talked about it on this pod, like how we've reacted to that.
I wonder if anything has changed there. Does he remain untouchable?
Well, I think the Warriors are still taking a long view on Podziemski, but the bottom line with it is this is a team that has designs on trying to be good right now. And DeAnthony Melton tore his ACL, unfortunately, is sitting there not playing because of some, I shouldn't say quirks in the rules, but because of how the rules are structured. Because Golden State made this trade right now, on the first day they could make the trade, they could take Dennis Schröder's $13 million salary and they can use that in a trade again, combined with other players before the trade deadline. So, to your point, Brian, if they do go big game hunting for any kind of star player and they want to combine salaries together, or if they just want to turn Dennis Schröder into something else later with another piece or two, because they are below the first April hard cap. They can aggregate players. They can do all this stuff. They're a few million below.
No, I think they were like 500,000 below. And this trade cost them. One of the reasons why this trade was like so perfect.
Oh, yeah, right. That's right.
In any sort of trade, they could only take, they're hard capped. I know this is tedious. I'm sorry, but in any sort of trade, they could only take on an additional 500,000 in salary. They couldn't take on the extra 20%. And Schroeder's contract was $200,000 higher than Melton's. So not only were they able to make a trade for a player that they needed for a player that was injured, but this hit that narrow window where they could actually make a 1-for-1 player trade and it wouldn't affect their apron status.
That's right. I was looking at the wrong number in Bobby's sheet. Yeah, they're right now they're about 300,000 below. So it doesn't take any tools off the table, to your point, and it gives them another guy who can create a shot and handle the ball. We've seen them struggle in the clutch. We saw in the Rockets game, their offense completely fell apart in the final 3 minutes because it was basically, unless Steph had the ball in his hands doing something, they couldn't get anything going. So I'm not a big Dennis Schröder fan, but I think he fits what they need right now. It's a very low risk move, and it doesn't take anything off the table for later. So I like it for everybody involved.
Wait, I thought it was the elementary school refs that held the Warriors scoreless for the final 3 minutes.
That's what some people would argue. I would argue it's one of the worst 3 minutes of basketball I've ever seen offensively.
When they either couldn't get the ball across half court in time or couldn't get a shot up in time on half the possessions.
MacMahon is referring to the end of the game against the Rockets, where there was a controversial call, which the NBA said was the correct call. But no matter what you want to believe about whether that call should have been made, which allowed the Rockets to win the game at the free throw line with like a few seconds left, the Warriors totally screwed up the end of that game, including Steph taking a really poor.
Let's just be honest. Steph Curry wanted to embarrass Dillon Brooks and hit.
He wanted to night-night him.
He wanted to night-night him with 10 seconds to go in the game. So he got a step back and took the shot. And he even admitted after the game, like, look, I should have done it differently. But if I made the shot, we won the game. Yes, we know. Of course,
if he does make it, which if Steph likes the shot, you're gonna let him shoot it. You're gonna live and die with that.
You know what though? That's not true. That isn't true.
No,
Steph
and
Curry. No, it's not. No, listen. The Warriors are struggling. Steph Curry is an extremely experienced player. He's an all-time great player. You can't go for the celebration shot in that spot. You just can't. They desperately need to win that game. Forget the cup.
I agree that you can't do that. However, you're going to live with Steph trying that play.
Well, that's fine. I mean, yeah, sure. You're going to live with Steph doing any kind of shot, but that's different than like, it's all good. Like he can't make that kind of mistake.
There should have been a lot more focus on the Warriors.
That's right.
Completely shut down by the Rockets than there was on a call. I get it. It was controversial. Like, do you blow the whistle?
I don't like the call, and the call is made by one of the most veteran NBA officials, which made it even more surprising.
Well, the one good thing about it is you sure as hell couldn't cry conspiracy, because I promise you this: the league office was not, hey, keep those Warriors out of Vegas. We don't want we don't want the Steph draw.
It also allowed for an incredible meme-worthy reaction from Steve Kerr.
Sure, it ended up all being fine. But look, that was just all of that was a sign that game was a microcosm of the team's problems, which is they really struggle to score when anybody but Steph has the ball. And Schroder will give them a lot more oomph with that. And he's in a contract year. He's had a very good start to the year with the Nets. So I think it makes sense for everybody. And it does give them flexibility to still make big trades later on, which, as we know, the Warriors with, Joe Lacob and company at the top are always looking to try to do.
Well, and like you guys are pointing out here, DeAnthony Melton, obviously, unfortunately, the guy was hurt. But the fact that he was that mid-level sized expiring salary, that's a chip in the trade market, but they essentially got the same type of chip back in Schroder, except for Schroder can help them on the floor, and still end up getting moved if there's something worth doing where you need that salary in the deal.
And by the way, just one other thing really quick on that part of it. You mentioned this before, Brian, about how the Warriors are only a few $100,000 below the hard cap. The salary slot that we're talking about here, $12-13 million, like, this is what's going to be the primary currency over the next couple of months trade-wise. I know everybody likes to talk about, is this big name player, this big contract going to get traded? I think we're probably about to talk about one of them. But those deals are going to be extraordinarily hard to make. And the deals that are probably going to happen are for guys like Dennis Schröder making mid-level money, making $60 million, making $18 million. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's only a handful of trades of very significant salaries, if even that many, over the next couple of months. And that's just something for fans to remember as we get into, today's the official start of trade season, quote unquote, for the next couple months in the league. And I'm just not convinced we're going to see a lot of fireworks between now and the trade deadline.
Let's talk about a guy with a $49 million salary who is probably on the Warriors list, although I would say likely not at the top of it. And that's Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, and a guy who tends to participate in pyrotechnics when he is looking to be moved. Speaking of fireworks.
Because he dyed his hair orange right after the day after Shams connected him in the Suns.
You gotta love a guy subtweeting with his hair. Like
he said, no. He said,
I just like orange.
Yeah.
This was on the schedule for me to have orange hair now. Sure.
Yes, it was laughable. Anyway, so look, the bottom line is this. As soon as the Miami Heat Pat Riley publicly said basically that they were not going to extend Jimmy this year. As soon as that happened, which was in May, you knew. That was
the second their season ended last year. At his end of season press conference, he said, we're not extending Jimmy Butler.
Right. As soon as that, and by the way, he didn't say it flippantly. He obviously came in there knowing he was going to say it. As soon as that happened, you knew that eventually there was going to be some Jimmy Butler stress this season, one way or another.
Yep.
Butler makes $49 million. Okay. Let's just real quick address the Suns connection. Bradley Beal is not playing that well for the Suns. When he does play, he has missed the last two.
Or that often, but yes.
He has missed the last 2 games with a swollen knee, which Mike Budenholzer came out before the game on Sunday and said, it's not an injury, it's just swelling. Which I don't even know what to make from that, but we've heard
the same about him.
You know what that means? You know what that means? It means he's a player who's played a lot of NBA games, who has some knee swelling, who, by the way, is only owed $110 million the next 2 years. And, by the way, has the ability to block any trade, which I know you're about to talk about. So just setting you up.
So here's the thing. The Suns cannot aggregate players. Okay. So the only players that they could trade for Jimmy Butler, and by the way, I know that the Suns have interest in Jimmy Butler. This is not a controversial statement. It is not some sort of secrecy.
Sure. I'd also like $10 million. If someone wants to give me $10 million, I'll take it. That would
Jimmy
be great.
Jimmy would like $100 million, and I think the Suns might give it to him. Let me just say a few things. So there's only 3 players the Suns can trade for Jimmy Butler: Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. That's it. There's no what about these? No, don't.
And 2 with an asterisk. Beal's the asterisk since he does have technically the no trade clause.
Correct. Well, and so that's the player that you'd want to trade in a vacuum. Beal, to make, but for the Suns and the Heat to make a deal, there's 3 negotiations. One is whether Beal would waive his no trade clause to go to Miami, which when he was in Washington, he's on the record as saying his preference was to go to Miami.
Yeah.
And when that happened, the Heat didn't want him. They were not interested in making a deal with the Wizards. That was 2 years ago. I don't think that the Heat now want him.
In part, the Heat didn't want him because Mark Bartelstein, Bradley Beal's agent, who's we just had on the pod recently, was not willing to give up that no trade clause.
Well, that's
in the deal,
second negotiation.
Yes,
the first negotiation is getting Beal to waive the no trade clause to Miami. I actually believe that could be done. It hasn't been done, but I believe it could be done. The second negotiation is with Beal to retain the no trade clause. I don't see any team, not just the Heat, I don't see any team trading for Bradley Beal wanting to let him leave it in place. That's 2 negotiations with Beal. I don't think that's happening. Mark Bartelstein, who was on this podcast, I don't think he's doing that.
No reason for them to do that.
Number 3, the Heat would have to want Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler. And quite frank, first off, number 1, I don't think that they do.
Well, all I'm going to say about that is in our piece on Friday, we reported that the Heat are looking at their future books as they're making decisions on this stuff and looking at the potential of being in the tax and in the repeater tax and in the second apron and dealing with the draft pick stuff that comes with that. So if you're taking on $110 million of future Bradley Beal money, you better be getting a heck of a deal. And
quite frankly, I'm just going to brass tacks here.
Sure.
If the Heat were picking who to pay $110 million for the next couple of years, next 2 years, I think they would just extend Jimmy.
Yeah. Sure. If they wanted to do that.
I mean, if you're looking at Bradley Beal with a no trade clause versus just extending Jimmy Butler, you're extending Jimmy Butler. So
Well,
I don't think
right.
I don't think Brad Beal is going to be on the Heat.
I'm just saying the point is, if you're trying to sell them on taking that much money, you better have a lot to give them. And here's how many draft picks the Suns have to trade. That would be one.
One
So
first
they
round
don't.
pick.
One
That,
first,
that's
and
what
I
I.
think
But
they've got a
that's
few
the
seconds,
rest
yeah.
of them doesn't matter. They
And
have
that's
one
the other
first round
thing.
pick.
Okay, so and just to be clear, there could be a third team where Beal could get rerouted, where this would be possible. But again, that would require 3 negotiations.
Yes.
And right now, of those 3 negotiations, 2 of them I think are no-goes. I don't think Beal's waiving that no trade, permanently. Like maybe he waived it one time. And I don't think the Heat are taking Bradley Beal. Okay.
Well,
so
and bringing in a third team, like I think it's reasonable to think that Beal might waive it for Miami, but he's not waiving it to end up in Detroit.
Correct. Or Utah or Charlotte.
Yeah.
And these are the types of third teams. Okay.
And he's got 110 million owed. So
I
there
think
you go.
the more interesting thing on Butler is this. What Butler has made it known to the Heat, not just to the rest of the league, but to the Heat as well. He has got a player option in his contract for $52 million next year. He has made it known to the league. He is intending to not pick that up. His position is that no matter what happens, he is going to be a free agent, unrestricted free agent in the summer of 2025.
That is not a binding statement.
Of course not. And he doesn't have to
Yes.
decide until June 29th. Okay.
Correct.
But that's what his intention is.
That's
Sure.
right. And the reason that you would say that is to maintain a modicum of control so that a team
Or attempt to have a modicum of control.
whatever. So, but I do think a Warriors Miami trade for Jimmy Butler is possible. That it would.
I think it's pretty difficult though, because again, you come to the same situation though. Because let's say if you're doing that trade, right, the most likely money in the trade is Dennis Schröder, who they just got, so $13 million expiring, Andrew Wiggins, who's owed, 27-ish a year the next couple of years, 28 and 30 the next 2 years, and then probably Jonathan Kuminga in the deal, right? Who's in the last year of his deal and is going to be expected to get a hefty raise as a restricted free agent this summer. If the Heat make that trade, they're going to be in the luxury tax if they retain Jonathan Kuminga in 6 months and probably well into it. So I think that I think is going to be a difficult sell.
I do think, as a side note, what Kuminga does over this next month is going to be important for the Warriors. He is getting more playing time. I don't know exactly what's happening in this game. As we're recording this podcast, they're playing the Mavericks.
Well, what's happening is Luka is lighting the Warriors on fire. He's got a 40-point triple-double. The third quarter's not over.
And Kuminga has 12 points on 10 shots.
Okay. Well, anyway, but if you were the Heat, would you may not be interested in listening to a Bradley Beal offer. If the Warriors called, you probably would at least say, is there something here?
Well, it's worth listening. But again, Jonathan Kuminga is averaging 16 points a game, and he's shooting 31% from three. It's just not, again, like we're just not talking about
either
that.
Way, I don't think
package.
there's a Butler trade happening. If there's a Butler trade happening, I don't think it's happening until we get close to the deadline. I don't think it's happening on December 5th.
I don't think this is one that's happening until the deadline for all the reasons we've talked about with how difficult it's going to be to make deals happen. Because it's just, it feels like if anything is going to happen, it's going to be at the last minute because you're just going to have to jump through so many hoops to get it done. You're going to exhaust all other options first.
What's more difficult? To move a salary like Jimmy Butler's in a trade that makes sense for your franchise, or to deal with Jimmy Butler when he wants to get the hell away from your franchise?
Well, if there's any franchise that's equipped to deal with that, it's the Miami Heat.
Yeah, but he hasn't done that so far this year, at least that aggressively.
Okay. It's early.
Well, that's true.
It's early. But again, it's also in Jimmy's interest to, if he really wants to be out there on the market as a guy at 35 that's looking for, max kind of numbers next year, like if he burns this thing to the ground in Miami, I don't think that's going to help his cause to get the kind of number he's looking for in salary as a free agent. So, this isn't like Jimmy Butler from when he was in Minnesota 7 years ago, when he's in his prime and can be like, hey, I'm going to do what I want because I've got max leverage to get wherever I want to go. That is not the case still. He's a very good player, but he's in his mid-30s, and there's some downside if you're going to pay him a multi-year massive number as a free agent or in an extension off a trade.
Well, and he's great when he's on the floor, but he misses a lot of games.
Well, that's part of what I'm talking about. I mean, he's got to be available. He's got to be. I mean, when he's having a fine year, he's averaging 18, 5, and 5, and shooting 55% from the field and 36 from 3. Like, he's been fine, even good. But is somebody going to pay him, 3 for 150 when he's going to be 36 next September? Maybe. It's probably a tougher sell. So
I'm just going to say
nuking things I don't think is going to help that cause, is my point.
Right.
By the way, the Warriors got within 7 by the end of the quarter. Kuminga, right after Bontemps was poo-pooing him.
I'm sure he went crazy.
Had 2 buckets, including a pretty spectacular finish on a fast break.
Sure.
All right. 2 things real quick before we wrap this discussion up. One, I don't think the Heat think it's the worst thing in the world if Jimmy picks up his option for $52 million. And that might be something he doesn't want to do, and he may not make up that decision until June. And that would really put him in a tough spot, because then he could get traded anywhere, wouldn't have any control.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's, Bontemps, you've talked about this for months, the log jam that we're in this summer with I know that there are going to be some teams with cap space, and in theory, those teams or Butler could do a sign and trade, but I don't think the Heat necessarily are fearful that they could lose him for nothing, because I still think that, there's that option.
Here's the thing. If we're talking about what we're talking about trade wise, this isn't going to be the Rudy Gobert trade. It's not like it's a choice between take the Rudy Gobert trade or lose him for nothing. So, yes, if you may end up having him walk in free agency, go to Brooklyn or someplace with cap space. But like, if the choice is, hey, we can get one okay asset back and take back tens of millions of money we're not thrilled with in this current environment, that's just not, it's not the automatic thing that people would think.
Why would Jimmy Butler make any sense for Brooklyn as they finally?
They're basically the only team with cap space. That's my point.
That.
So, like, sure, he could go sign a big number with the Nets if they want to try to be competitive next year, in theory. But like, again, it's like there's only so much you can bluff with these things.
Well, also he could arrange a sign and trade, but the point is, I don't think this is all or nothing for the Heat. I think that's important to know. Having said that, I do think as we sit here in mid-December, and we could be having a different conversation by mid-January, of the like star level players who are out there, the most likely to be traded, I think, is Jimmy, because the team that has him, I think, is open to it. It's just a matter of lining it up. The other thing I'm going to say is Kevin Durant did not sign an extension this last summer. He had 2 years on his contract. He didn't have to. He could only add a year. However, he didn't sign a contract, which means that next summer, and he's having a great season. He's been a difference maker. They are playing right now against the Blazers. I don't know how they're doing in that game, but they, I believe, are 11-1 or 11.
They won by 7.
Okay.
I think they were 11-2 with KD, now 12-2, I believe, with KD in the lineup.
I think that they, I don't think it's something that they go to sleep worrying about every single night, but they're going to want to get Durant into another contract, because the way he's playing right now, they're going to want to keep him there alongside Booker. So the fact that this would even be kicked around, that even be discussed, I think is an understanding that's not just for this year, but it's also to make sure that Durant is in a good place. Just keep that in mind for down the line. So, but all right, gents, enjoy your time in Vegas. Enjoy your Cup game, NBA Cup final on Tuesday, and we'll be talking to you after that. Thank you to Jackson, our producer, Bontemps and MacMahon. Thank you for watching and listening to the Hoop Collective podcast. We will talk to you in a couple of days.
Adios, amigos.